This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. Today I will be discussing the next film for Star Wars Week. This movie has drama, war, and crazy Sith spinning. I'm of course talking about Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So some technical details of Revenge of the Sith. It was released May 19th, 2005. And that was 15 years ago, and I remember the huge publicity surrounding it. I remember all the toys, the Lego sets, I remember the Lego Star Wars game coming out then. There were a lot of things Star Wars coming out that year. And I think that's due to the fact that they thought that was the last Star Wars movie to ever be made, so they went all out in merchandising and toys to, capitalize off of that. I remember one of my buddies had one of those glow-up lightsabers, and I would go over to his house, and in his garage, we would lightsaber fight, and that was really, really fun. It was a huge deal for me as a kid, seeing all of this stuff Star Wars. And I was kind of happy that that was the last one, that there were only 6 of them. It was a perfect ending to it. So the movie made $868.4 million worldwide, which was more money than Attack of the Clones, but still less money than The Phantom Menace, which grossed over $1.2 billion. Like I said earlier, I remember all the huge craze around Episode 3. So it was a huge deal. I don't think people realize how big of a deal it was when it came out. Nowadays, we just think about, the Rise of Skywalker, and we think about all the newer ones, but we don't remember for reals how big of a deal it was when Revenge of the Sith came out. So to kind of sum up the plot in a few sentences, it's Anakin's turn to the dark side. It's starting out with him and Obi-Wan trying to save Palpatine from General Grievous, who had kidnapped Palpatine on his ship, and just the turn of events that lead Anakin from being a true Jedi all the way until he becomes Darth Vader. And normally I would give a full plot synopsis, but I kind of decided with this one, I think at this point everybody's seen it, so it wouldn't really help to tell everyone what it is. So, just like all the other prequel films, hasn't had too many changes like the original trilogy, but I digress. Yeah, Revenge of the Sith, it's crazy how now people don't even remember that was the last one for a while. And I really wish it was. As much as I love the sequel trilogy, I love the characters in it. I think it's pretty interesting. I'm now realizing I really think it should have ended with Episode 3. I don't mind the spin-offs like Mandalorian and all those things. That's awesome. I think they should keep doing things like that, but I really think 7, 8, and 9 really suffered because they were trying to either be too much like George Lucas or not at all like George Lucas, and they didn't have one distinct vision in mind, unlike these movies. See, the prequels, like I've said before in other episodes, as terrible as they were, they had a goal in mind. They were a specific beginning, middle, and end. And how it was going to end. Anakin was going to become Darth Vader, but we didn't really know how. So I'm just glad that we were able to get that full story, and it was kind of full circle. 7, 8, 9, I'm really divided with them because they're cool, the visual effects are really, really cool, but the characters, I just don't connect with them as much. Then again, though, with these prequel movies, the only character, one, singular, that you really connect with is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anakin and Padme, you don't really connect with them. They're kind of just, they're there. But yeah, that's kind of the beginning, Episode 3, I remember not being able to see it for a while. When I was 7 years old, I was still really young, so my parents didn't really want me to watch it until I was a little bit older. So I really didn't see it for a few years. And I was so mad because I really wanted to see it in theaters. But it's okay, I've forgiven my parents. So that's kind of the beginning, that's kind of the plot for Revenge of the Sith. I'm going to go on a break real quick, but first, here's a message from our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Here's how. It's totally free. There are tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer and even your cell phone. But that's not all. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You could even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a complete podcast all in one small place. So go on and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
Okay, so we're back from our break. So now I'm going to get into some critical reviews of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So Roger Ebert gives it a 3.5 out of 4 and cites similar to Attack of the Clones. The dialogue and the characters are very flat, but the visual effects are still stunning and amazing. And many other critics agree with him by saying as well that, the dialogue was weak and the characters weren't very, they were pretty one-dimensional, hard to connect with. Like I said earlier, Obi-Wan really is the only character you really like. Everyone else is kind of okay. Now, all that being said, though, it is the highest rated film of the prequel trilogy. It has an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is higher than Last Jedi and a couple other Star Wars movies. Looking at you, Rise of Skywalker. So in regards to this film, people like it, but mainly because it completes the story, not because it's actually a good film. They just agreed with Roger Ebert, yeah, the dialogue is kind of hokey, and yeah, the characters are a little meh, but at the end of the day, it's still a Star Wars movie. It's still going to make a boatload of money, and it did. I remember when the movie came out, all the action figures and Lego sets had a picture of Darth Vader, and then he was surrounded by flames to kind of like resemble Mustafar. And I thought that was really, really cool marketing. I mean, I didn't think that as a kid, but now I really think that was cool marketing because, I might not remember a whole lot from my childhood, but I really remember that design and those toys. I think they were some of the best ever made. I think that really was the peak of the Star Wars fandom and Star Wars merchandising. I think now we're kind of seeing a decline in it. I mean, yeah, Mandalorian was popular and Baby Yoda is pretty popular and making a lot of merchandise. But you just don't see it as much as you did with this movie. You don't see tons of Lego sets everywhere. You don't see action figures everywhere. But maybe their main focus now is with the video games. I don't know. But I just remember there was stuff everywhere for this movie. Billboards, posters, t-shirts. It was everywhere. It was hard to get away from it. Yeah, so those are the critical reviews of this film. So now I'm going to get into my opinions. Kind of like what most people think. I think Anakin and Padme are really annoying. But I personally think Padme is more annoying and more wooden than Anakin is. Especially in the scene where she's talking about how, so this is how liberty dies with thunderous applause. I mean, the line is amazing, but the way she delivered it was like, oh, so this is how liberty dies with thunderous applause. Like, it sounded like she didn't care. It didn't have much inflection in it. It sounded pretty stale. And maybe that was the direction part of George Lucas. Natalie Portman, generally speaking, is a good actress. So maybe it was George Lucas. If you watch the behind the scenes of the prequels, you'll see he had a lot of control. And the people working with him had a hard time convincing him, when he was doing something wrong or when he should change something. So I can't imagine how difficult it was to work on these movies. and so much of it was blue screen. That's another critical point I kind of have is you can really tell that they're around blue screens. I mean, the special effects are phenomenal. Like the opening sequence with Obi-Wan and Anakin flying over Coruscant. It's amazing. Like even now, it's still some amazing visual effects from ILM, but it was so CGI heavy, it's kind of mind-numbing. But we have to give it some credit. We have to remember, this was only 10 years after Toy Story came out. I say they did phenomenal for the time period. You know, like I said, it still looks amazing now. I mean, some of the effects, like the lava and all that, I know it was real lava, but you could kind of tell that Anakin and Obi-Wan weren't really there. You know, there's some other like droids that kind of look flat. Yoda looks kind of flat and matted. One other critical point I have though, and that's in regards to the visual effects, none of the clone troopers were real clone troopers. Like every single one of them was CGI. So another character I kind of didn't like in this movie, sadly, was Palpatine. He was kind of too silly for me at some parts. You know, his dialogue was just too corny, too cheesy. I did like when he actually was the Emperor, but it's kind of hard to take him seriously when he was, you know, fighting Mace Windu. And then my last point, this is my favorite prequel movie. I mean, I think it's way better than Phantom Menace, especially better than Attack of the Clones. I still think that's the worst one. So, overall, I think it was a decent film. I don't think it's the best Star Wars movie. I think that still belongs to The Empire Strikes Back, but I think this is definitely in the top 5 best Star Wars movies. Alright. Well, those are kind of my thoughts and feelings about Revenge of the Sith. Next time, I'm going to discuss the next film for Disney Week. And this is the first of many of the collection movies that Disney was making during the 1940s. And this was due to the fact that during World War II, a lot of their staff were sent over to fight the Nazis. And then on top of that, a lot of soldiers were coming in so they could make propaganda films for the US. So Disney was making a group of collection films where it's a bunch of animated shorts that they kind of knit together into one big Roadhouse type of movie. And this is the first one that they ever did. And this is a film based on their adventure down in South America. This episode is going to be all about Saludos Amigos. Until next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/surfingthroughcinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes and on past episodes.